Baldur's Gate 3 is primarily a game about acquiring raw physical strength and arcane magic so that you can push innocent people to their death. As a human being, this is the closest I have ever come to self-actualization. However, if you're not in the 99th percentile of the autism spectrum, you may also enjoy this, and this. Today, I will be playing the game as an illusionist who destroys his enemies by severing their grasp on reality, eventually leaving them a blind, demented husk lying in a pool of grease. Is that a real cat over there? No, it's an illusion, and as your eyes glaze over in bewilderment, I am currently stealing everything you own. Beyond that, I'll also be maxing out my charisma, so that I can effectively gaslight people into believing that I didn't just shoot them in the neck with a crossbow. Can I single-handedly skyrocket the price of antipsychotics, or will the savage world of Baldur's Gate stop me in my tracks? There's only one way to know, but first, a word from our sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Displate. They offer a paralyzingly wide selection of high-quality metal posters that you can mount on your wall in just 20 seconds with no power tools. How is this possible? With the power of electromagnetism. I did have to pronounce that word phonetically, but I can assure you that the mounting process is much easier. Simply open your package, admire the giant yellow duck staring at you, find a suitable place to put him, place a sticker on the wall, stick a magnet on the sticker, apply the duck to the magnet, and marvel at the sight before you, because you have now transformed your dilapidated shower into a work of art. No more punching holes in drywall, because this method is completely non-destructive. Finally, you'll be able to find a Displate for just about anything with their category system. Or, if you'd prefer, you can customize your home page with several keywords and allow Displate to present some options for you. For example, Displate has quickly and intelligently identified my proclivity for Colombian energy supplements. Once you have some designs you like, take them to the checkout and use my discount code for up to 38% off with delivery in 5 business days. Thank you, Displate. Now back to the video. It all starts with character creation. Look, there's a lot of options, so let me walk you through this really quick. Pick your favorite marginalized group and ignore everything else. Except for this, you're going to want to be extremely deliberate when choosing your genitals, because if they're too large, you'll get a -1 modifier to acrobatics. According to my research, option D is the current meta. Now, do all of this, and then name your character. We will name ourselves Bruvak after a Magic the Gathering card that I could never afford because he's $40 goddamn dollars. I've even tried asking my sponsors to pay me with this card, but they seem less than receptive. Anyway, the journey begins. The game starts with a very long cutscene that I will now summarize with a high degree of inaccuracy. Please enjoy the complimentary visual aids while I explain. The year is 1739. You're living in communist Japan when suddenly the US military invades and kidnaps you along with several other salarymen to conduct CIA experiments on your body. First and foremost, they give you a brain parasite that will, if not removed, slowly transform you into an American citizen. Fortunately, our Chinese allies come to save the day, and the slave ship we're being transported on crash lands somewhere in Poland. Our first objective, escape Central Europe at all costs. Second objective, remove the brain parasite to avoid an excruciating death. We awake from our containment pod, and I'm trying to figure out my surroundings, so I approach this big bowl of goo and roll to inspect it. I get a 1 and learn absolutely nothing. This immediately sends me into a blind rage, and I begin smashing the bowl with my staff. It explodes and nearly kills me. Very nice. I might not understand my surroundings, but I do at least understand my spells. Right now, I have several sleep spells, some basic illusions, a plastic cup of hydroiodic acid, and the most dangerous of all, a spell that covers my enemies in grease. These will be our tools of survival. Adventuring a little further into the ship, I came across a man who appeared to be having a very relaxing nap. Unfortunately for him, he made the mistake of falling asleep with his brain completely exposed, so naturally, I grabbed it with both hands and squeezed it as hard as I possibly could. This killed the man. Proceeding along a walkway, we encounter Lazelle, a fighter who joins our party without my consent. After several hours of trying to push her off a cliff, I eventually give in and accept her existence. It's probably for the best, because we run into a group of imps, and I quickly realize that Bruvak is not well equipped for combat, so he will need a capable team to help him avoid an immediate and painful death. After violently dismantling the local wildlife, we continue into some kind of antechamber, where we find find Shadowheart, a paladin with a remarkable penchant for being racist. We'll need a healer, so I decide to free her from this pod. With 2 female companions, my meta quest of creating a harem based around my self-insert is almost complete. We just need one more, so we venture forth in search of another party member while also looting several dead bodies. Because remember, it's not grave robbing if they're not buried yet. Eventually, we wander into the control room, where a squid man is fighting some kind of devil. After blinking and rubbing my eyes several times, I was still confused by this situation, so I settled on grabbing the controls and crashing the ship into the side of a mountain. Despite a piece of debris nearly decapitating me, I survived, and so did Shadowheart. I began scouring the beach in search of survival items. Mostly, I found random herbs, but I also stumbled upon a divine artifact of immeasurable power. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Cowboy Hat Bruvac. We proceeded northward in an attempt to orient ourselves in this world, which was when we were ambushed by a group of intellect eaters. They hit very hard, and I'd like to tell you I fought the good fight and killed them, but I didn't. However, upon reloading, I had much more success because, in an attempt to lubricate my enemies, I accidentally started a massive grease fire that claimed both of their lives. My lack of fire safety caused us to level up and win the fight, which finally allowed me to specialize from wizard to illusionist. Right now, our spells are roughly on the level of a high school magician, but as we progress, we'll eventually manifest several reality-destroying powers. After a little more wandering, we stumbled upon a highly effeminate man named Asterion, and I immediately began sizing him up as the 3rd member of my harem. Unfortunately, he surprised me by initiating a Lords of the Locker Room style wrestling match to challenge my authority as the Discord admin of the group. Luckily, I was able to headbutt him into submission and he joined the team. It's been a long day, so I decided to rest at camp and spend the night attempting to seduce Shadowheart with my naked body. This was a critical failure on all fronts. The next day, we left camp and began our search for Lae'zel. Once we have her, we just need to find a doctor, get our brain parasites removed, and we'll be all good. However, we didn't find either of those things. Instead, we came across some kind of American citizen who had fallen out of their mobility scooter. This is widely considered a terminal condition for them. I could attempt to help him, but let me tell you something. When you look at this handsome young man, you may see a complex person with hopes and dreams. But me, I see nothing more than experience points, numbers I can collect to grow stronger. So naturally, I stomped on the man's head and collected 35 XP for my party. After a little more running, we came across the gate to some kind of outpost. However, we aren't the only ones here, because a gang of goblins is attempting to break into the settlement. I decided to help fight them off, and a battle broke out. Bruvac starts things heroically by bleeding to death within the first 30 seconds of combat. Luckily, most of the goblins are distracted by the human NPCs, and we manage to overpower these archers. By this point, Bruvac is back up, and he casts a cloud of asbestos on this group melee over here, which effectively turns it into the most chaotic mosh pit imaginable, because everyone inside is blind and swinging clubs around with murderous intent. With our enemies lacking the ability to see, we were able to pick them off with ranged weapons to complete the battle. After looting the goblins, we follow the humans inside to learn about what just happened. Turns out there's 2 main factions in this area, these people and a society of goblins that are hell-bent on killing them. The town leader appeared to be upset with this man for leading the goblins to his camp, so in an effort to ingratiate myself with him, I rolled a d20 to hit the man as hard as I possibly could. Success. Following this, we found ourselves a vendor, which was very fortunate because I'm currently carrying around several estate sales worth of pot lids and human skulls. After selling them to the vendor, I decided to perform the ultimate illusion spell, which is stealing back all of my items along with the rest of his money. Truly, Bruvac is an unrivaled sorcerer. As we prepare to leave town, we hear about a druid healer that might be able to help remove our brain parasites. Unfortunately, they've been captured by goblins, so we'll have to find a way to break them out. But first, we're going to need a lot more XP. As soon as I'm outside the city limits, I drop to all fours like a feral beast and begin trying to sniff out even a morsel of experience. Eventually, my senses lead me to this cave. I won't lie, the first time I explored it, I failed to notice these gigantic threatening statues, and I paid for that dearly. But on the second attempt, we did much better, deactivating the statues and sneaking up on a group of goblins discussing a druid they recently kidnapped. I decided to start the fight bombastically by pushing one of them off this 20-foot ledge. After that, Bruvac snuck around the flank and coated our enemies in a thick layer of grease, which caused them to slip and fall, thus wasting their turn and allowing Asterion to start assassinating them. Eventually, they started fighting back, but they soon experienced a certified British moment when Bruvac ran up to them and threw a cup of acid at their face. With the goblins dead, I decided to rush to the aid of the man they kidnapped. He's alive, but seriously injured, so I made sure to steal everything out of his inventory and then use Shadowheart to heal him. I was hoping he would be the healer that could help us, but after scouring his Wikipedia page, it looks like he's just some random jackass, which means his ultimate purpose in life is to be forcefully converted to experience and incorporated into my XP bar. Initially, he didn't take this proposition very well, but eventually a well-placed crossbow bolt to the forehead made him see things my way. Following the cave to the other end led us back into town. While I was here, I found a goblin locked in a cage, along with a woman attempting to kill it. Bravely, Bruvac stepped in the way, and by standing there intimidatingly and critically failing several dice rolls, we were able to convince the lady to leave the goblin alone. Her name is Zaza, and she's telling me there's some kind of witch doctor that can remove my parasite. Apparently, if I release her, she'll meet me at the goblin camp and set me up with a free doctor's visit. I decide she's either telling the truth, which is great, or she's lying, and I can convert her to experience points, which is arguably even better, so I let her go. Now, from what I gather, the goblins are a pretty serious faction, and I'll need to become stronger in case they betray me, so our XP quest continues. After some brief exploration, we find Lae'zel trapped in a cage with two tieflings deciding how they want to kill her. I approached them, and by utilizing a series of overtly racist remarks, Bruvac was able to convince them that she's a dangerous wild animal and that they should run away. In hindsight, I probably should have bludgeoned them to death and absorbed their life force. Anyway, I let Lae'zel down, which means the ecchi arc of my journey can truly begin. But first, I need to level her up as a barbarian. Why would I do this? For one simple reason. She can now pick people up and swing them around as melee weapons, or even just throw them across the room like cheap furniture. This level up was well timed, because not far down the road, we stumbled upon some abandoned ruins, where we were confronted by a man who appeared to be battling the late-stage symptoms of syphilis. From the moment I laid eyes on him, something deep within me knew that one day I would kill him. As it turns out, today is that day, because he just told me he's a treasure hunter, at which point I ingested every drug in my inventory and attacked him viciously. He called his friends for help, and together they formed a fairly dangerous team with a tank, healer, and rogue. I would be intimidated by this, except for the fact Lae'zel just picked this man up over her head and smashed him into his friend like a sledgehammer. This produced a lot of blood, and he's not moving. Apart from that, Bruvac used a high-intensity strobe light to blind the entire enemy party, at which point we spent the next 10 turns punching them in the head until they scored a perfect 0 on the Glasgow coma scale. After the battle, we leveled up and unlocked 2 major spells. Mirror Image allows me to create several holograms of myself to confuse enemies during combat, but more importantly, we have Crown of Madness. It's a spell that penetrates deep into an enemy's mind and causes them to enter a blind rage, attacking the closest thing to them, including friends. More on that later. Anyway, with our generic doppelgangers dead, we attempted to access the dungeon they were looting. The door was locked, with one of their teammates guarding it from the inside. Luckily, I was able to convince him to let us in by doing a very mediocre impression of the man Lae'zel had just paralyzed for life. Upon entering, the guard was shocked, but not for long, because within seconds, Asterion turned him into a fine red mist. I spent the next 15 minutes darting around the dungeon, stealing everything that wasn't nailed to the floor, and let me tell you, the loot was good. We encountered another group of mobilized experience points, but things didn't end so well for them after they finished their turn next to a giant barrel of oil. With another group of adventurers defeated, we proceeded to this room. I'd like to go on record in saying, fuck this room. If you don't have a high enough awareness, you'll fail to notice the entire thing is a massive death trap, and that looks something like this.
My injuries need tending.
After carefully navigating our way through that, we managed to lockpick our way into the dungeon's main chamber, at which point I wasted no time in locating the loot room and accidentally summoning an undead army in the process. It's not looking good. However, the only note I have in my script for this part is Lae'zel fucks, and as it turns out, she certainly does. No amount of weaponized icicles could stop us, and with the room cleared out, we can now enter the treasure chamber. This was where we met Withers. I do not like Withers. He's some kind of mysterious undead lich who wields immense power power. Despite this, he insists on charging me $200 every time I want to edit my skill tree. I don't even think he uses money, I'm pretty sure he just doesn't want me to have it. Absolute dickhead. Apart from this, we found an amulet of lost voices, which allows us to speak to a dead humanoid. Now, even in death, our enemies cannot escape us. Eventually, we made our way out of the dungeon and walked down the road to find a man stuck in some kind of nether portal. I pulled him out because I am a lawful good character. His name is Gale, and we'll be using him as a backup companion in case any of us get crushed by a boulder or otherwise die permanently. A little further down the road, I came across a bloody pig, which I wouldn't have even considered suspicious until Asterion ran up to me, also covered in blood, and desperately attempted to convince me he had nothing to do with it. Thank you, Asterion, that was very subtle. After ignoring Asterion's attempt at character development, we moved down the road to find two people in a panic. Apparently, their friend is sick and he needs help. I tell them I'm a doctor and roll for a medicine check. I succeed. In reality, I don't know anything about medicine, but I am very good at lying. The man is clearly conscious, breathing, and relatively stable, so I tell his friends he's going to die and they need to leave right now. Once they're gone, I snap his neck and smash a barrel over his head.
Because I am a lawful good character.
After helping myself to the contents of his inventory, we proceed forward, looking for the goblin camp. I think someone gave me directions at one point, but I opt to ignore them and instead wander into this dangerous-looking cave. I also chose to ignore the several dead bodies I found inside the cave. This was perhaps a miscalculation on my part, because the next thing I found was a gigantic owlbear that had a very positive opinion about mauling me to death. Bruvac rolled to intimidate. Massive failure. Luckily, we were able to use the power of suggestion to penetrate the bear's mind and convince it to take a nap for a turn. I was hoping this would de-escalate the situation. Boy, was I wrong. Apparently, he didn't appreciate having his mind hijacked, because on the next turn, his eyes turned red and he started mangling Lae'zel like a piece of cheap meat. Through an exceptional amount of physical violence, we were eventually able to bring him down, but then we had to confront the real final boss, which was an overwhelming sense of guilt, because the bear's cub showed up and started making me feel pretty awkward about beating its mother to death. Whenever I'm in an uncomfortable situation, I solve it as quickly as possible by killing either myself or the other person, so we went ahead with the latter option. Overall, we received a modest amount of experience, a new piece of armor, and a broken spear. All we had to do was destroy a family for it. Very nice. Following this, we made our way across a bridge, which led to the gates of the goblin village. Unfortunately, it looks like those damn goblins killed a group of adventurers out front. You may be tempted to ask why I am covered in the blood of those adventurers, and also why I have all of their belongings in my inventory. In response to that, I would say, you ask too many questions. Now let's move on. I decided to go to camp because not killing a group of innocent adventurers in cold blood really tires a guy out. Unfortunately, while I was asleep, Asterion attempted to steal one of my highly coveted venereal diseases by sucking my blood. So obviously, I had no choice but to stake him through the heart with a tree branch. It was traumatic, but with the traitor defeated, we could all rest easy. With Asterion, incapacitated, we'll be needing a replacement, so I rotated Gale into the party and leveled him up as a druid. He specializes in biological weapons such as carcinogenic fungus, meaning he has access to several spore-based attacks in addition to some basic shapeshifting and the ability to whip people mercilessly with an electrical cable. Truly a vital member of society. With that settled, I took our group to the goblin village. One of the guards tried to give us a hard time, but by standing there charismatically and cycling through a wide range of facial expressions, Bruvac was able to convince her to let us in. After some meandering, I came across a group of goblins that had overpowered a gnome and tied him to a rapidly rotating windmill. As a self-hating gnome, I immediately became violently jealous that I hadn't come up with this idea myself, and so I decided to take action. Rather than confronting the goblins, we slipped off to the right, and I had Lae'zel throw Bruvac over a wall so that he could sneak behind the windmill and cast Crown of Madness on the main goblin. This caused him to become hostile to his own friends, who then proceeded to kick the shit out of him. By the time Bruvac joined the fight, the goblin boss was pleading for his life. Didn't work. We grabbed his axe for Lae'zel and extorted some money out of the gnome before continuing on our journey. While I was coercing our gnome friend, he mentioned something about a treasure cache hidden in town. I thought I saw it at the bottom of this well, so I jumped in head first. It opened up into a large cavern, and I made the unfortunate mistake of attacking this web sack, which alerted every enemy in the cave to our presence. Mostly, this consisted of gigantic spiders, but there were also a few ettercaps, which are hulking weird-looking creatures with massive talons. They also have some fantasy version of scabies, which they can transmit to you if you enter melee range. For this, my problem-solving consisted of using Gale to entangle our enemies, transform into a honey badger, burrow deep under the Earth's crust, and then summon a giant ball of magma that started rolling around and pulverizing anything that moved. Unconventional? Yes. Effective? Also yes. Despite battling through a series of man-eating spiders, I still couldn't find any substantial treasure, so we ventured deeper into the cave, which was when we found this big fella. Judging by his substantial girth and the fact the game just auto-saved, I'm going to say he's the boss of the dungeon. If anything in this decrepit pit would have loot, it's this guy. So I opted to start the fight by shooting him with an acid arrow. This did 8 damage out of his 125 points of health. Not good. Luckily, we were able to use a fireball to destroy the bridge he was standing on, sending him plummeting 100 feet down and taking 36 damage. This took him out of commission for a few turns. However, the other spiders started working their way towards us. Now this is slightly concerning. Actually, never mind. They also ended their turn on a bridge, and after having a grenade thrown at them, they're really not looking so good. Now we did sustain some damage in this engagement, but luckily one of Gale's abilities is that he can use his ungodly magical powers to summon a handful of strawberries and eat them. So we did that and gained most of our health back. Thank you, Gale. That was delicious. In less exciting news, the boss teleported back up, hatched some spider eggs, and then ran straight at us, once again ending his turn on the only available bridge. You can guess how that went. With the boss now taking the room temperature challenge, we just have to deal with the spiderlings that are swarming Lae'zel. To accomplish this, I introduced them to an ability called Gargantuan Cleave. This was a social interaction they did not survive. Following this, we looted some poison robes from the boss and made our way back to the surface. It was here where we found the 5th member of our party, Rodney. You see, Rodney is a gigantic treasure chest that I am sadly unable to open. I am, however, able to put him in Lae'zel's inventory and use him as a 300-pound weight to crush my enemies. Think of it like a very rudimentary kind of Pokemon. Rodney.
I choose you!
Now, feeling a bit cocky with our new party member, I decided to approach a group of ogres. They politely explained that they'd absolutely love to cave in my skull and consume my flesh. I seriously considered their proposition and determined that it was not to my advantage, so I deceived them into believing I had gang affiliations and they left me alone. In fact, they liked me so much that they gave me a horn that I can blow to summon them into battle.
Use it when the need arises, and never a moment before.
I cannot properly articulate just how tempting it was to summon them into town to beat the shit out of these annoying children, but if you've played the game, you'll already know. After this, we met up with Zaza, and she took us to the leader of the goblin camp. Her name is Minthara, and she's absolutely pissed at Zaza for bringing us here, because she can tell we have brain parasites, and apparently that's a big deal. Zaza tried to explain that she didn't know, and again, I had to battle my intrusive thoughts of hurting innocent people. Minthara eventually calms down and proposes that I betray my tiefling friends and help her raid their village. I approach this from the perspective of an illusionist. What could be a better trick than the illusion of trust? The tieflings think I'm their friend, but in reality, it's a cheap magic trick, and instead, I'm going to summon Big Mo and he's going to sodomize them. So I told Minthara I'm in, and she rewarded me with a dagger that would be really great for Asterion if he wasn't currently, decomposing. After this, I did some exploring in the village, which was when I found a bard named Volo. From what I could gather, no one likes Volo, and in an effort to fit in, I decided to throw Rodney at his head. Turns out I read the room wrong, because after giving Volo brain damage, everyone in town started stabbing us to death. This necessitated a reload for obvious reasons. This time, instead of giving Volo CTE, I just talked with him. But unfortunately, the guards didn't like this, and they decided to take him to prison for mandatory cock and ball torture. For some reason, I felt personally responsible for this, and visions of his mangled dick weighed heavily on my conscience, so I decided to help him escape. After some sneaking around, I found the cell he was being held in. I attempted to persuade the guard into letting him go, but she wouldn't budge. Shadowheart locked the door. I had Lae'zel cleave the guard in two. However, there are plenty of patrols that come through this area, and I won't lie, this looks pretty incriminating. I decided to hide the body by stuffing it into Lae'zel's inventory. In real life, this is not a solution I would recommend. What we really need is to get rid of the body, and even better, to blame someone else for our crimes. So we went down the hall to another prison cell, where we found a man being tortured by a goblin. After removing the man's toenail, I convinced the goblin that I had better interrogation techniques, and he decided to leave for a smoke break. The man was understandably upset by this, but I leaned in and told him that I'm actually here to save him. This was a lie. Instead, I took the body out of Lae'zel's inventory and threw it at him, covering him in blood and framing him for the murder. Now this is a foolproof plan, I thought to myself, but unfortunately a guard saw the whole thing and we cannot risk having witnesses. So I killed the second guard, compressed his body into Lae'zel's inventory, and then framed the man again for yet another murder. Things are getting out of control here, so I decided to flee the scene of the crime. I got all the way out of the goblin village and halfway across this bridge before I realized I forgot to even save Volo. All I actually accomplished was framing an innocent man for a double homicide. I could go back and actually rescue Volo, but I'm already halfway across the bridge. Anyway, I decided to travel to the wetlands for one final quest before betraying my friends at the village. Our journey to the wetlands consisted primarily of us stepping on hundreds of landmines and dying painfully. Eventually, we got past the Syrian biome and we found a group of people harassing an old lady. I've seen this kind of thing before. It's definitely sex trafficking. So naturally, I covered the assailants in fryer grease and immolated them without hesitation. I think they were actually accusing the old woman of being a witch, and once the fight started, she kind of disappeared in a green puff of smoke. So yet again, we may have killed some vaguely innocent people. As I explore further into the wetlands, I roll for wisdom and realize that this charming little marsh is actually a putrid fucking bog. Everything in here has been one big illusion. The environment is disgusting. The sheep are actually Australian citizens in disguise, and even the apples that I've been picking up this entire time, fucking poisoned. Legally, this is questionable. Morally, it's abhorrent, but personally, I'm really impressed. As an illusionist myself, I feel like I have so much to learn, so I started searching for the witch in earnest. Eventually, we tracked her down to this shack where she was keeping some young girl prisoner, but for all I know, that's an illusion and the girl is actually a scarecrow wearing a suicide vest, so I chose to ignore her. After some small talk, the witch offers to remove my brain parasite in exchange for keeping my eyeball. Listen closely when I say this is the face of a woman you can trust. Oh, never mind. She just stole my eyeball and ran into a secret tunnel. Now I feel awfully foolish. We gave chase, and after working our way through a series of her illusions, we encountered some enemies. From what I gather, they're innocent people being mind-controlled by these masks. You may be wondering if the killing of innocent people posed a moral dilemma to me. Clearly, it did not. We cleaned most of them up with melee attacks, and for the last one, Bruvac told her a joke that was so funny she doubled over in laughter. She was laughing so hard she didn't even notice when Gale summoned a magma ball on her head and killed her. Incidentally, the same magma ball also rolled into Shadowheart and obliterated her, but that's beside the point. After brute forcing our way through yet another moral conundrum, we entered a platforming area, and I'd like to say that I have never seen an AI display such a burning passion to end its own life prior to this moment, because these platforms are trapped, and if you let the AI attempt to navigate them, it goes like this. Anyway, after manually piloting each character through the traps, we had finally caught up to the witch. It looks like she has a hostage dangling precariously in this cage. I don't really care about that at all, but if I'm going to kill the witch anyway, I may as well pretend to be the good guy. We attempted to sneak over to the control panel and release the hostage, but the witch caught us and lit her on fire. I suppose I'm not very good at this whole hero thing. The witch started the fight by creating several illusions of herself. It's not obvious which one is real because they each hit very hard. However, the illusions disappear with even a small amount of damage, so I spent the next few turns throwing pots and pans at them until only one remained. I lit her on fire, bludgeoned her, and attempted to give her mesothelioma, but she just wouldn't give up. In fact, at one point, she even disguised herself as the hostage and forced us to guess who was the imposter. I am proud to announce that I guessed correctly on the second try. After another 10 turns of shooting her with crossbows and dousing her with acid, she started begging for her life. She offered to imbue me with great power if I let her live. I considered this briefly and then remembered this lady stole my eyeball, and so I decided to kill her. After battling a demon for 35 minutes, I was expecting a little gratitude from the hostage. Instead, she screamed at us and called me selfish. This was the final straw. I had Lae'zel introduce her to Rodney, and when that didn't work, I hit her for 200% of her maximum health. I wasn't even happy about it. Exactly 0% of this entire quest has been cathartic or enjoyable, and I'm missing a fucking eyeball. The only thing that can cheer me up now is to commit the ultimate illusion by betraying my tiefling friends, so let's go. We arrive at the tiefling village to find our friends preparing for the final battle. These poor saps really have no idea they're about to be on the receiving end of my greatest illusion yet. I walk up and sound the battle horn to initiate the final conflict. Goblins, spiders, and all manner manner of creature storm the field. Shortly after, Minthara arrives and gives me the signal to betray the tieflings and open the gate, which is when it hits me. What could be a better illusion than double-crossing your friends? Why, double-crossing the people who you were going to double-cross your friends for, thereby quadruple-crossing the entire situation and ending up exactly where you started in the first place. It's genius. I'm going to betray Minthara. She told me to slit the tieflings' throats. I called her a bitch, and the battle was on. Thankfully, I've made some preparations for this event. You see, I spent about 30 minutes collecting barrels and barricading our position. The side entrance is now far less accessible. The main gate is reinforced with a collection of chests under the command of Rodney, and I've also created a siege tower to allow Bruvac to oversee the entire fight from a strategic advantage. This was nice and all, but perhaps most importantly, I've covered the battlefield with explosive barrels, and the goblins have walked right into my trap. All we need now is one little spark. Oh, and look at that. Shadowheart is casting Fireball. The initial explosion cleared out 4 or 5 enemies, but the high-level threats such as spiders, ogres, and suicide bombers are still alive. They started chanting their war cries and buffing each other. In response, I had Bruvac use some potions I found at the witch's shack. This one gives you rabies for 10 turns. This one gives you intense schizophrenic hallucinations. And this one gives you hemorrhoids. Simply terrifying. Anyway, I started throwing these potions at our enemies, which caused infighting to break out among their ranks. Our defenses were holding up so far, but the spiders started scaling our walls and devouring our defenders. Aside from this, the goblins were spamming us with casks of acid, and even worse, their suicide bombers were getting dangerously close to Rodney. In response to this, I have Bruvac use an enlarging spell on Lae'zel, increasing her size by about 50% and allowing her to absolutely decimate the first spider. And just in time, because the second one has jumped over our wall and started fatally rearranging Gale's anatomy. Luckily, he was able to thunderwave the arachnid to an early demise. But around this time, the goblin sappers committed a truly despicable crime by blowing themselves up and taking Rodney with them. This is a moment I may never truly recover from, but I can use it to justify a lot of violence, so let's get to it. Minthara began healing her troops, and the goblins started pouring through the gates and climbing up to our platform. Our tiefling allies were doing their best to hold them off, but it was all for naught when Minthara herself joined the fight and began pounding the shit out of us. That's when I knew it was time. Bruvac blew the war horn and summoned a group of ogres to our aid. This was fantastic because they started beating the goblins to death. However, they also started beating the tieflings to death, which caused them to become hostile to us. I did not anticipate this development. I had Lae'zel put the tieflings down quickly, and we focused our attention on Minthara. After several turns of blinding her, beating her, and strategically throwing poison apples at her mouth, Gale eventually took her down with an ice bolt. The fight is finally over, and honestly, I'm impressed. We were allied to one team, then to another, then back to the original team, only to halfway through change to a third team and kill everyone else. I must say, that was an illusion even I didn't see coming. And as I stand here looking over the burning battlefield and charred corpses of several people I once considered friends, I am reminded that in the end, there are no friends, only experience points. And with that, Bruvac's journey has come to a close. Will he ever remove his brain parasite and avoid an excruciating death? Probably not. Thanks for watching.